Batman.
I am Batman!
These videos are not for children. If you are a children, then piss off.
Hey there, it's me, your least favorite YouTuber, Infuso. And by now, at this stage in our platonic virtual friendship, I think you'd know enough about me to know that I'm a bit of a Batman fan, to put it mildly. And when most people of my generation, or a little bit before my generation, think of Batman, they typically think of the Tim Burton series. And it's not hard to see why. Tim Burton's Batman revitalized the character. Sure, there were comic books out at the time that really retold the tale of the Dark Knight and made him, actually dark, but not everyone picks up a comic book. And at the time, the public knowledge of Batman was basically that he was a billionaire in bat ears who liked to drink a tall glass of OJ and dance. Yeah, that was the Caped Crusader. And then Tim Burton comes along and delivers this version of the Batman mythos that looks closer to a Cure music video than anything we've seen Batman related before. This version of the Defender of Gotham was iconic. So iconic, in fact, that over 2 decades since the Tim Burton movies came out, they're being given a proper follow-up sequel in a brand new comic book series, appropriately titled Batman 89. A comic book sequel that I personally am really excited for. But this got me thinking, which I don't do often. This got me thinking about all the other Batman media that tried to reference, or more accurately tried to attach itself to this franchise. Yeah, believe it or not, there have been a couple different movies and even TV shows that desperately tried to subtly stand behind Tim Burton's series and say, oh yeah, we're with that. First and foremost, the most obvious of which being Batman Forever and Batman and Robin, which were supposed to be the next 2 movies in that franchise. After Batman Returns proved to be a little bit too gothic for a younger audience, leaving them with nightmares and leaving the studio with an overabundance of never-sold McDonald's toys, Warner Brothers decided to go in a different direction, inviting Joel Schumacher to come in and take the helm. Now, Joel would be a great fit for this franchise, had he been making something a little bit closer to his days in Lost Boys. Instead, he was brought in to completely retool the image of the world's greatest detective, dialing it back on the darker themes and elements from the previous movies, and upping the camp factor significantly. Despite most of the original cast not returning to the project, and Gotham feeling like an entirely different place than the Gotham shown before in the last 2 movies, the tone being complete polar opposites and the film just overall not feeling like a follow-up but a brand new beginning. Oh, and that's not to mention that Two-Face in this version of events somehow has 3 separate faces. I'm sorry, listen, I love Tommy Lee Jones, but he looks nothing like Lando Calrissian. My suspension of disbelief only suspends so far. How are these the same person? How am I supposed to think that? These movies were in fact supposed to be the next chapters in the book Tim Burton wrote, hence the returning Alfred and Commissioner Gordon, the only 2 actors from those movies to come back for these ones. There's also a cheeky reference here and there to what came before, but nothing really concrete.
You like strong women. I've done my homework. Or do I need skin-tight vinyl and a whip?
Personally, I'm kinda glad that the comics are gonna act like these 2 films never happened. And that's coming from someone who actually really enjoys Batman Forever. They just don't work as a new installment and are probably better viewed with a clean slate and an acknowledgement of this just being its own thing. Now, I previously said that Michael Keaton as Batman was iconic, and it was. But I think there's definitely at least one more person who people think about when they think of Batman. A man who may or may not be in the outro of all my videos. I'm talking, of course, about Kevin Conroy. The animated series gave us performances, character arcs, and storylines that have stayed with Batman fans for years to come. The show even helped shape the overall depiction of Gotham's protector. The series was monumental, and its legacy is legendary. But such a series wouldn't exist without Tim Burton's influence. To say that this took inspiration from the first 2 Batman movies would be a bit of an understatement, as the show itself seemed to lightly imply that it may or may not be tied into said series. The show had a similar tone to the movies and even used some of the same music cues, with its actual theme song sounding ripped directly out of Batman Returns. And speaking of ripped straight out of Batman Returns, was the show's depiction of the Penguin. Now, up until this point in time, the Penguin was nothing more than a wealthy aristocrat and a thief. Your standard frumpy, big-bellied short man in a suit, which I can mostly relate to except I don't wear suits. Whereas the Burton movies depicted him as a pointy-nosed, 3-fingered penguin man who lived in the sewers of Gotham City and rode a big yellow duck boat. And, oh hey, look, it's the exact same thing. Again, that has never been a thing before the Tim Burton Batman movies. And actually, from my understanding, this was mandatory. Those in charge of creative actually wanted to present the Penguin as was, but they were instructed to make him look closer to the Danny DeVito version of the character. Granted, the animated series did make the character significantly more sophisticated than the very thing of nightmares. Seriously, a bleeding Frank Reynolds is gonna haunt me for the rest of my life.
Frank's nose is bleeding all over the place.
Do I look suspicious?
But seriously, at the end of the day, we all knew which penguin this penguin was trying to be. Outside of that, in one episode when Batman is locked up, a doctor in Arkham specifically refers to the Joker as Jack Napier, as if that's his real name.
Jack Napier, Harvey Dent, Pamela Isley, or as you call them, the Joker, Two-Face, and Poison Ivy.
The origin name that he was given in Batman 1989. Not to mention that the Joker's origin story in the animated series is that Batman had let him fall into a vat of chemicals, which again is taken directly from the Batman 1989 movie. I mean, I know that this was canon in the comics from time to time, but not always. And also, the comics never presented him as a gangster in his past life before being the Joker. And yet the Burton film and the animated series did. It seems like the animated series, for a time being at least, attempted to loosely tie itself in with the successful Tim Burton movies. Whether it be the people on the creative end of things or the people on the end of the business end of things, for one reason or another, it was kind of seen as a spiritual sequel. Until it grew enough to become its own thing and then kickstarted a whole universe, which is what happened. But it doesn't stop there. I wish it did, but it doesn't. As the travesty that was the Catwoman movie so desperately wanted to try and act as a spin-off to everyone's favorite Batman movie, Batman Returns. So much so that the making of this Catwoman, who was not Selina Kyle, in fact, but was someone named Patience Phillips, their origin story was nearly identical. How Patience becomes Catwoman is almost a shot-for-shot remake of how Michelle Pfeiffer became Catwoman. This time with more CGI cats, because, you know, can't go wrong with CGI cats, can you?
No.
Now, mind you, this was never the origin story of Catwoman before Tim Burton's movies. Catwoman was never some woman chosen by ancient cats to give her 9 lives and cat-like abilities. She was just your standard garden variety cat burglar. Pun intended. This movie gives the secondary Catwoman, a woman who did not exist before this movie, the same exact origin story as Selina Kyle from the second Batman movie. Again, almost shot for shot. If that wasn't enough, the movie even drops an Easter egg of the first Catwoman when Patience is looking through photos of Catwoman who came before her. They so badly wanted to low-key call this canon, but unlike those cats, no one was biting. You know, I don't know what it is that made fans want to separate this from one of the greatest Batman movies of all time. But somewhere between the horrible BDSM catsuit and Halle Berry literally rubbing catnip on her face, fans of the source material just didn't get behind it. All of this makes sense, though. Well, no, Halle Berry rubbing catnip on her face does not make, it will never make sense. I am not okay, I'm uncomfortable, still. This happened in 2004, I'm still uncomfortable. But the origin story being told here makes sense, as the script was a revised and reworked version of a solo Catwoman spin-off from the Batman Returns movie that wound up getting lost in developmental hell. And that also makes sense, because the movie's final product acts as hell on Earth. You know, I want to say more on this, but I think there's a Star Wars line that perfectly emulates how I feel about it.
It's time to let old things die.
Last but not least, well, maybe least to some people, because people really typically aren't a fan of what I'm about to bring up. But last but not least was the little-known show titled Birds of Prey. A show that lasted for all of 13 episodes and made an impact with no one but me. More on that show in the near future. When this show was about to air, the WB promoted it by using scenes from Batman Returns, namely the Batman and Catwoman scenes, kind of implying that this show was spun off from it.
Legend tells of a love between the Cape Crusader and a beautiful adversary. Batman and Catwoman left behind something extraordinary. The child of two legends.
And when the show actually aired, it didn't reuse the Batman Returns footage, but instead it just basically recreated it. They literally used the Batman suit from the Tim Burton Batman movies, and the Catwoman suit was entirely the same design, but now with the added benefit of her hair coming out of the back of her mask. I think it's also fair to mention that you can make a clear comparison between Ian Abercrombie and Michael Gough's interpretation of Alfred, and how it's nearly the same exact performance. I mean, it's great, but it's very much the same kind of energy there. Typically, Alfred's much more sarcastic, and while he's always there for Bruce, he's always present. Also present is his dry wit and sense of humor.
Miss Gordon, I heard you've discovered our little secret. Yes, I admit it. I am Batman.
But these Alfreds are much more wholesome and all-knowing. And sure, maybe you could say that this is a bit of a stretch. I don't think it is, but I can understand where you're coming from. This is practically the same performance from two separate actors, both equally good. It's kind of a shame that Ian didn't get a chance to play the character again. Was into it. I enjoyed it. The show also on occasion heads over to Arkham Asylum, and whenever it does, it always uses the same piece of stock footage from Batman Forever. Every exterior shot of the asylum is met with this. The show also made occasional, albeit brief and vague references to the initial series, while it was trying to tell its own stories. So, there you have it. Those were the Tim Burton Batman pseudo-spin-offs. Of course, none of them were official, except for maybe Batman Forever and Batman and Robin, but even in saying that, none of these felt like a legitimate spin-off. I mean, they all seem to derive from the Tim Burton Batman movies, but they didn't really seem to properly sequelize it. Is that a word? Probably not. It is now. So it's kind of nice that those movies and everything else is being retconned and written off. I, for one, am really excited about the prospect of an official spin-off now. I'm really excited to see how the characters look, how the characters act. I can't wait to see the return of characters that we've seen before, and also the inclusion of new characters. I'm gonna take a shot in the dark and say that maybe finally Lando Calrissian will in fact become Two-Face, and Tommy Lee Jones will be nowhere in sight. I'm wondering how they're going to continue the Batman and Catwoman romance, considering she's only on one life now. She can't keep dying because she only has one left. Who knows? Maybe Max Shreck's son rises to power. I don't know. Anything could happen at this point in time. Anyway, I look forward to the future and seeing what this series brings. You can bet your ass at some point I will be talking about it on this channel.
I'm Batman. No, dude, I'm Batman.
Hey there, it's me, your least favorite YouTuber, Infuso. And right now, I can't help but feel like I'm in the middle of a Billy Mays infomercial, because I previously made a video where I talked about some of the hidden attempts at sequelizing the Tim Burton Batman films. And yet here I am making this video, which is essentially the equivalent of just going, but wait, there's more! Now in the video that I'm talking about, I did use some of the more obvious examples, such as Joel Schumacher's intended canon follow-ups of Batman Forever and Batman and Robin, as well as the failed Catwoman movie, but the less said about that, the better. The happier we will all be as a society. I even spoke about the suggested canon of shows such as Batman the Animated Series and Birds of Prey. But what I didn't realize is that, despite talking about all of that, I still actually managed to miss a couple things. And I'll just go on record saying this now, while I intend on covering just about everything I can here, it probably still isn't everything. Because the Tim Burton Batman films are so iconic to the character that they are still to this day, at the very least, used as inspiration for new Batman flicks. So I can't imagine that I'm going to get this all in just 2 videos. I'm going to try to, but I'm probably going to miss a couple things out. Especially considering the fact that I'm not talking about the many comic book adaptations that without a shadow of a doubt had Burton's influence in them. I'm looking at you, Catwoman. It's a real nice design you got there. I wonder where I've seen it before. With that being said, let's put our bat cowls on, shine our bat signals in the air, and let's just get right on into it. Now, this first one is a little bit less attempting to follow up the Tim Burton Batman films, and more so just referencing them. You see, in 1989's Batman, a pre-Two-Faced Harvey Dent is played by Lando Calrissian himself, Billy D. Williams. The character originally was intended to return, ironically enough, in the follow-up Batman Returns. And the movie was actually going to depict his transformation into the Two-Face character. Apparently the role that went to Christopher Walken, the Max Shreck character, was a complete rewrite. And his death scene at the end of it, that was actually supposed to be where Harvey would become Two-Face. It was decided instead to create Christopher Walken, and that's how we got here. Depriving audiences everywhere of seeing Billy D's take on this character. Unfortunately, they would never see Billy D. Williams as Two-Face. Or at least not until the Lego movie came out in 2017, where not only did they bring Billy D. Williams in to voice the character, but they also pretty much made him resemble Han Solo's frenemy. It was definitely a nice little reference and a tip of the hat to the performance that never was. But if I had one complaint, and as you can guess, me being a YouTuber here, you know that I do, my complaint would be that Williams just isn't given a whole lot to do in the movie, and he only voices a few lines here and there. Regardless, it was a nice touch, I personally appreciated it, and it was good to finally see. Speaking of Batman Returns, on that same level, this is another not so much follow-up, but reference. In the second Batman flick, the Penguin's family is shown during the opening credits. Now, Penguin's father was originally scheduled to be played by Burgess Meredith, the man who played the Penguin back in the day in the 1960s show, and also the 1960s movie. Again, it would have been a nice nod to the past, but unfortunately Meredith's health was declining, which would force him to sit this one out. And in his place, they cast Paul Reubens of Pee Wee Herman fame. Reubens didn't have a speaking role in this, he just appeared for 2 scenes being disgusted by his penguin-human hybrid son, and eventually cast his carriage into a lake, which I think most of us would do. It just seems like the norm. But surprisingly, he'd actually make his return to a Batman-related project in the future, once again playing the Penguin's father, this time in the show Gotham. Now within the show, unlike the movie, Reubens was granted speaking permission, so that was nice, and he actually performed more as this character. Interestingly enough, both performances, despite being Penguin's father, are entirely different characters, with his character in Batman Returns being named Tucker Cobblepot, and his Gotham counterpart, Elijah Vandal. And outside of the name change, the characters still couldn't be any more different. While Tucker was cold and careless in his brief appearance in Batman Returns, his Gotham counterpart was beyond considerate and compassionate for his son. There's an actual dynamic there, not just disdain. Additionally, in Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman, early on in the Season 3 episode Don't Tug on Superman's Cape, it's revealed that the characters Tim and Amber Lake have stolen the Batmobile. Which, I mean, is just ridiculous, because you can't steal stuff from Batman, because he's Batman. And what Batmobile is it that makes an appearance in the show? The 1989 Batmobile from the 1989 Batman movie, if that wasn't clear before. Yeah, I think I'm gonna need to get the Watchtower database boys here to try to figure out if it will canon. There are also comic book adaptations of every Burton and Schumacher film. Comics that I am not ashamed to say that I personally own. These adaptations usually include scenes that didn't make the cut in the movies, including, but not limited to, Two-Face and Riddler essentially getting high on their own supply. Oh, and the Riddler drugging a chick. No, not kidding. That happened. There was also a bunch of video game tie-ins for each and every installment in the franchise as well. Almost all of them were awful, with some worse than others. And spoiler alert, Batman and Robin really has to stand on the tip-top of that list. Though to be fair, maybe they were just trying to make it as close to the source material as possible, you know? God-awful movie, god-awful video game. Makes sense to me. Again, like the comics, I don't want to get into too much detail here, because, well...
That comes later!
Another interesting inclusion was the collaboration the Batman franchise had with WCW of all things. The Bat Bomb that is known as Batman and Robin starred WCW wrestler Jeep Swenson in it, playing the Brute Bane. So it only made sense to have the group Jeep Swenson was in appear in Gotham City themselves, right? No? The Dungeon of Doom literally cut a promo in Gotham City. You can't make this shit up. Probably because you're far too creative. We also, of course, get a small glimpse into the Burtonverse once again during the Crisis on Infinite Earths event, where we're shown the begrudgingly beloved Alexander Knox.
I hope you're watching, big guy.
And now, for the real reason I made this video. The old school OnStar commercials. How did I forget about these when putting together the last one? I did it a complete disservice, and I'm handing in the batarangs and the bat ears now, guys. My career as a Batman fan is clearly over. Even when I'm talking to you about them, I'm showing you these clips, without me even saying anything, you have to realize that they definitely ripped a couple of pages out of Tim Burton's Batman comic book. Not that Tim Burton actually made a Batman comic book, it was a figure of speech. I'm just trying to be clever. Which is twice as hard for me because I'm stupid. I think anyone with eyes who have seen the Tim Burton Batman films could probably tell that Gotham looks quite similar to how it does in those movies. But that's not even the half of it. You see, these commercials were composed of reused old Batman movie assets. The Batman suit that actor's wearing in these ads is a combination of Val Kilmer's suit from Batman Forever and George Clooney's suit from Batman and Robin. Like I said, you could probably just use your eyes and tell that this is at the very least taking inspiration from those movies. Not to mention that the Batmobile used for this is the same Batmobile from Batman Returns. How could anyone watch these commercials and not think of the Burton Batman movies? What I loved about these commercials is that there was always a small story. And there were so many of them that it felt like an ongoing serial, dipped in product placement, that little, extra flavor. A bunch of villains from Batman's rogues gallery, such as the Riddler, Joker, and Penguin show up, but to be fair, they look significantly different from their original on-screen adaptations. Actor Curtis Armstrong, or as a lot of you probably know him, Booger, or Snot, played the Joker in these ads. He'd also later go on to play Adam West's butler in the Return to the Batcave movie, in which it was also shown that he was not Adam West's butler, but in fact, the Riddler in disguise. The commercials even had Michael Gow return to his role as Alfred Pennyworth. Not that this should shock anyone, because if he didn't turn down Batman and Robin, he's not going to turn down anything. To say that this was inspired by the original Batman franchise is pretty much an understatement. There were even comic books that followed the commercials. Now, this product placement may sound stupid, and it is, but it is stupid enough to work, because OnStar seen a major increase in sales because people watched and loved these OnStar Batman ads. Then of course we have the latest example of branching out the Burton movies, with Michael Keaton confirmed to be reprising his role as Batman and Bruce Wayne in the upcoming Flash movie, which I am more than just a little hyped about. I personally can't wait to get the chance to talk about this on the channel after it's become a reality. Until now, it's just a dream in motion. But until that movie comes out, I'm your least favorite YouTuber, Infuso, and I thank you guys for watching. Hope to see you in the next one.
I am vengeance. I am the night, and that was Infuso. Just remember, if you're not tuning in, then you're missing out.
So, if you like the words that came out of his mouth hole, and you too would like to become a V-generate, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, nerds!
And if you're not joining the fun, you're in for one bad day. And you know what they say about having one bad day?
Catch him next time. Same bat time. Same bat channel.